Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Town Hall. My name is Mele Araya, and I am the host of tonight's program, Century of Story and Song. The Town Hall was founded in 1921 by a group of suffragists who wanted the space to be a home to adult education, consciousness raising, and civil discussion. Over the course of the next 100 years, this is our centennial, many novelists, philosophers, and poets came to the town hall to share their work and speak out on issues of the day. Poets like Langston Hughes, Nikki Giovanni, and the St. Vincent Millay, and some members of the Beat movement and the Nuyorican Cafe legacy were all on our stage at one point or another. As we celebrate National Poetry Month, we turn to a poet of the great American songbook, Cole Porter. Here with us today to talk about his legacy and to prepare us for next week's program, we have Lynn Siebert, Dr. Lynn Siebert, who was trained at Juilliard, Vassar's, Rutgers, CUNY Graduate Center, and l'École des Arts Américains at the Fontainebleau in France. Siebert was a university professor for 3 decades and is currently a program director for Morris Arts, a county arts council. She authored a 2-volume study on the music of Cole Porter, the Kiss Me Kate chapter in the Cole Porter Companion, and the essay on the original cast recording of Kiss Me Kate for the Library of Congress's National Recording Registry. Next, we have Dr. Susan Weiss. She is currently a professor of musicology at the Peabody Conservatory of Music and holds a joint appointment in the Department of Modern Languages and Literature at the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences at Johns Hopkins University. In fall 2014, she was the Robert Lehman Professor at the Harvard Center for Renaissance Studies. In spring 2019, she was also a visiting professor at Princeton University. Among her numerous publications are Bologna Q 18, an Introduction and Facsimile Edition, 1999, Music Education in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, 2010, with Russell E. Murray and Cynthia J. Cyrus, and in 2016, a Cole Porter Companion with Don M. Randel and Matthew Shaftel. Next, we have a friend of Town Hall, a longtime producer, creator, performer here. We have the great Scott Siegel, who's the author of 48 books, including the Encyclopedia of Hollywood, first and second editions, and American Film Comedy. He has created more than 400 major concerts that have been performed all over the world. He has written, produced, directed concerts for Michael Feinstein, created scores of nightclub acts that have played at major clubs around the globe, but is perhaps best known as the creator, writer, director, and host, and I would say performer, at Town Hall signature series, Broadway by the Year, which is currently celebrating its 20th season. For more information about all of Scott's shows, we'll give you a link, but head over to siegelpresents.com. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited for this conversation.
So a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mila.
We are too. Yes.
Well, first off, I'm just so excited to be talking about Cole Porter in 2021, and for it to be an event that is actually at Town Hall that is spurring this for me. So I just wanted to say that. But before we get into the study of him, I was wondering if each of you would just answer the question of when did you first meet Cole Porter, or when did you first meet his music? So if you wouldn't mind starting us off, Scott.
I guess probably it was as a rock and roll as a kid, hearing "In the Still of the Night" as a pop song, and not realizing until later really that it was Cole Porter. I think that was probably my first introduction, "In the Still of the Night."
Wow. And you, Lynn?
I think I heard it. My mother was a trained opera singer, but she also had a great love of early Broadway, and she had tons of sheet music, and she would sing show songs from all of the different shows and by many composers. And I just had heard Porter growing up all through my childhood.
Wow. And for you, lastly?
Well, a similar story. My grandfather used to sing "Don't Fence Me In," and I didn't know it was a Cole Porter song until much later. And then one of our dear friends was leaving Johns Hopkins, and he said the text, he didn't sing it, to "Every Time We Say Goodbye." And the minute I heard him speak it, I heard the music, which was very powerful for me.
Well, now that we've talked a little, or just heard a little bit about what brought you to Porter, I would like to start with Porter as a young person. I know in Scott's presentation next week, he'll get to some of the beginnings of his career, but what was Cole Porter listening to as a child? What was his early training? Would you mind starting us off with that, Susan?
Well, he was really trained by his mother, who was trained herself as a musician and as a dancer. And she took him to concerts in Chicago. You know, they were living in Peru, Indiana. And he also was studying with the Nussbaum brothers in the Marian Academy, violin and piano. His mother and of course the Nussbaums played music with him all the time, and he was very talented. His father actually was reading Elizabeth Barrett Browning poetry, and his literary interests were stimulated on that trip to the Marian Academy. He would go into these bookstores to find spicy books, and some of the lyrics later on, Love for Sale as one example, I think came out of the reading that he was doing when he was supposed to be practicing. But he really, he wrote early on. He was, I think, writing his own music, The Song of the Birds, and his mother got the second piece he ever wrote published. The Song of the Birds is in manuscript copy, and it's a lovely little piece. He loves birds, and it tells a story. It's kind of a narrative of the mother and the birds cooing in the nest. Classic. I mean, it's a little bit based on Franz Lehar. Yeah.
Yeah, and Lynn, is there anything about his specific training that you think really carries through that we should be thinking about, his early conservatory training?
Well, I think he, aside from studying, piano and violin at an early age and pursuing his training through Worcester and then through Yale, he went on and studied at Harvard. He was supposed to be in law school, but after the dean heard one of his shows, he agreed that Porter's affinity for the music school was the better location for Porter to devote his efforts. And then he went on and trained at the Schola Cantorum in Paris with Vincent Dandy and studied orchestration with others. So he had an extraordinarily thorough background. He studied counterpoint, he studied analysis, he studied, music theory from all different vantage points, and he knew the songs of the great leader composers, Schubert and Schumann and Hugo Wolf, and of course he studied Debussy and Tchaikovsky and Beethoven and Bach and Chopin. So we know that if you look at his early manuscripts and his student pieces, that he was very well acquainted with a very wide variety of classical training. And that was reflected in all of his work. And I would just add, from his early exposure, I mean, at the time, operetta was the rage, and he knew Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, which certainly were profoundly influential in his early work. And music of Romberg and de Koven and Victor Herbert, and others of that period, even Jerome Kern, were all part of the sounds of the times. And then he, of course, knew of the music of George M. Cohen and some other early musical composers at that time as well. And they all went into that brilliant brain of his and affected the way that he absorbed music and musical styles and was able to employ those skills at will to show in his songs.
And Scott, can you tell us just before we delve even deeper into Porter's work, can you speak a bit about, this of course is an image of him at Yale, but could you tell us a little bit about composers of this era and the straddling or the way that what we would call classical music now or operettas, how all of this stuff seemed to, the genres didn't seem so well defined, and how writers like him may have been, taking from a lot of different areas of music.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting in that list of composers, so many of the people who went to Broadway, from Gershwin, Romberg and people like that, Jerome Kern, all had this classical training, but also for many of them, being Jewish also blocked their career paths to a certain extent. So when jazz started to bubble up in the 20s, and they saw something in that appealed to them, that was sort of the crossover from Black culture into almost white culture, because Jews were not quite accepted into that world yet. But that was the melting pot of music, really. And I think it was out of that melting pot that all of them kind of helped each other. One of the things that always appealed to me, and looking back at this era, was the fact that there was a real camaraderie among these people. There was a great respect and admiration, especially as they became successful together. And Irving Berlin, who was not part of that world, he was not classically trained, he was sort of self-taught, was a great mentor to Cole Porter, and in some ways, I wouldn't say saved his career, but certainly made him a made man as a Broadway composer by taking a full-page ad for him when one of his early shows was failing at the box office, and he put out of his own money, he took a full-page ad in a major paper, and Irving Berlin at that point was the equivalent of a rock star in music, and it had a huge effect, and it turned a potential flop into a hit show, and really helped establish Cole Porter. So, and you notice in the music of all of these pantheon composers, they reference each other in their songs, and it's almost like those Looney Tunes cartoons where the Warner Brothers would have Humphrey Bogart show up in a Daffy Duck, that there was this great sense of we're comrades in this great musical adventure.
Well, while we're here, Scott, would you mind just starting us off in a conversation about when his professional career really started going? So, he leaves law school, he goes where?
Well, he, as mentioned, he goes to Paris, and he's studying there. He met Linda, his wife, in Paris. She was an American divorcee who was also very wealthy, and but he wanted to get into the social world, and she had the cachet to get him into that aristocratic world of European. Americans and Europeans who were in the go-getter world that was the 20s, roaring 20s. And the real key, I mean, I love this story. He went to visit Richard Rodgers, and Richard Rodgers was a big success by this point. And Cole Porter was not. He had a failed musical in 1916, and he was selling songs periodically that would show up in shows, and he was present as a composer, but not as, he wasn't Gershwin, and he wasn't Jerome Kern, and he wasn't Irving Berlin, he wasn't any of those people. Cole Porter was an unknown name, essentially, and he said to Richard Rodgers, "I think I figured out how to write show music. It's Jewish music." And that was the key. It's in Richard Rodgers' autobiography. Basically, he learned to use the black keys on the piano, and that was his key to writing show music for Broadway.
Incredible. We actually had a question about that you answered. Yeah, there are actually questions. I think this is something Lynn and Susan, that I would want to hear you talk about too, is, he comes from wealth. He's a Yale guy. He's surrounded in this industry of singer-songwriters by a lot of Jewish Americans, the Gershwins and others. And so there is a question from Len Heinemann, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is there any substantiation to the claim that Porter was appropriating Jewish type themes, as seemed to be the case with the Chodesic-esque die, 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 dies, and my heart belongs to daddy? I hope I pronounced some of that right.
Yeah, there is that. But I think Richard Rodgers said he wrote better Jewish songs than any of the Jewish composers in Pan Alley. I think, he was just eclectic. everywhere he went, he picked up things from his early days, even in New Haven when he went down to the bars and U.B. Blake and some of the others they had the orchestra, right? The very interesting jazz orchestra, and then he followed through on that when he was in Paris. At of course at the bars, and we'll talk about Bricktop later, but he was fascinated, I think, by the exotic sounds that he heard on his trips to Europe, to Marrakesh, to other places where he claims he picked up some of these tunes like the Begin and some of the other ones that we've heard. It's possible that he just absorbed like a sponge, like the oyster that he writes about, right?
I think that's certainly true. If I could just chime in, and I agree. He picked up so many different styles. I mean, even when he was writing, when he was in Paris, he picked up the French chanson, the torch song styles, and he picked up elements of Italian boat songs when he was writing one of the pieces for Kiss Me Kate. And there are many other examples where he literally was just a musical sponge and incorporated so many of these different elements. So I don't know that it was anything unusual for him to pick up Hasidic tunes as well as part of particular songs if it suited the song and the need of the text.
So Scott mentioned, I think, some of his early works, The See America First, the one that flopped. I think that and Pot of Gold were based on Gilbert and Sullivan, weren't they?
Yes.
They were probably parodies of Gilbert and Sullivan, yeah.
Well, in bringing up other composers, I did not know this at all, but that it is believed that the short ballet landed, which then became, I believe, within the quota, may have been the first symphonic-based, like pop orchestration or jazz orchestration, basically preceding Rhapsody in Blue and Gershwin's other works, not necessarily preceding African-American, classical music or art song and such. But yeah, I was just wondering if someone could speak about this period in Paris just a little bit more.
So he was, as Scott said, he was involved in this circle of Americans living in Paris. The singer heiress, Winnie Singer, who was the Princesse de Polignac, had a salon, and there were people there like Stravinsky and Mio, Gertrude Stein, Cocteau, Satie. He was surrounded by these luminaries in the 1920s, and Linda, by that time they were married, really had aspirations for him to be a classical composer. So she got him hooked up with Darius Milhaud, who introduced him to people at the Scola, and he had some lessons with Charles Coquelin. And when he was writing the ballet, which was, I think, inspired, by the Murphys, his friendship with Gerald Murphy, Coquelin did the orchestration for it, but he left out all the jazz elements in it. And so years later, I think Bill Bolcom, who wrote a foreword for our did a 2-piano version of it, tried to put the jazz elements back. But most recently, we have a version that Scott Morrison put together. He found some documents. Wow. And so it's now in the jazz style that probably Cole had envisioned for this wonderful ballet about immigration.
And that work was done in 1923, and the Rhapsody in Blue of Gershwin premiered in 1924. So yes, he did precede it by a year.
And it depressed him when he realized, he said, Gershwin can write a much better classical ballet than I can. He was supposed to do a second ballet with Leon Bakst, the Russian designer, but Bakst died. And then there was this hiatus. And I think you're right. It was Irving Berlin's brother-in-law who got him to write Paris in 1928 to get him back into writing again outside of his just private little circle of friends.
It's funny about the private circle of friends, because they had these constant parties, these elaborate, expensive parties. And principally what Cole Porter was known for in this circle was writing and performing at the parties, and he would create these funny songs. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Miss Otis Regrets was a party song that he'd written for that, and he pulled it out, and he was encouraged to use that when he finally was writing for the stage, because he had all these great songs that everybody said, "Oh, this is wonderful! This is wonderful! You should do more with it." And but it was really that milieu out of which he was able to make the transition from being this fun guy at a party, and who often the host of the party, who would be able to use those influences, those people, to help him get to the stage.
Yeah, I always wondered about that, because he seemed like he was able to improvise at these parties, and yet he was so dedicated to changing his lyrics and using a thesaurus when he was writing. It seemed like a contrast in an approach to how he composed, that he could compose so freely in front of his friends, but was almost overly determined when he was at the keyboard composing. And then he had this, amanuensis, whatever, in Albert Sermet, who did a lot of the heavy lifting for him, because he was left-handed and he had trouble, with manuscript, with writing music. So he, his clefs are backwards if you look at them in the score. And he would sketch out some things, and then he would leave it for Sermet, this Hungarian operetta composer who worked with Berlin and Kern and others, to fill in the harmonies. He would sort of just give him the cues.
Well, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, Scott's point was also very well taken. I think of things like The Tale of the Oyster, which ended up in 50 Million Frenchmen, but started out as The Scampi, which was a satire that he wrote for one of those parties. It became something that he reworked and made into a veritable art song, very classically done, but marvelously wicked in its humor and in its takedown of social climbing. So that was one of his favorite themes.
Well, we've got to get to some of the structure of these songs. And I know, I think it was with you, Susan, that you said you'd looked at how many drafts and how many different versions he worked through before he came to what we know as the final song. Can you speak to looking in the archives and seeing some of his papers?
Yes, but the person who can really speak to it is Mark Eden Horowitz at the Library of Congress, who wrote a chapter for us and found these little tiny papers that he would, put in between his scores with the lyrics, and how he would change the words over and over again, leave blanks where he was going to put in something current to have it rhyme. He loved to use the names of people in his social circles and to make fun of them in some ways. So there was a bit of mockery in a number of the lyrics. But as far as the music was concerned, I think he was very nimble and fluid in the way he wrote his tunes. I think that was a little easier for him than putting the two together. And I think Scott, we've talked about the fact that he was one of the few who wrote both the lyrics and the music. There were others, Kern, I think, did as well, but sometimes they worked together with other lyricists. Gershwin, of course, had his brother, and some others had other people who could work with.
Well, something I definitely want to get to is the different kinds of songs, but something else that's been on my mind is it's National Poetry Month, and we've been thinking a lot here, at least, about lyrics as poetry. And I think it would be really useful to me, and hopefully to some other folks, to listen through, his songs, but looking out for consistent stylistic techniques or themes that you all wouldn't mind identifying for us. For example, one thing that someone has already brought up in the chat, Eva Heinemann, what was it about Liszt songs that appealed to Porter so much? So Scott, would you give us an example of a Liszt song so people who are not Eva would understand what we're talking about?
Well, there's so many. We use one in the concert next week. You're the Top. And I don't want to give away too much from that because I want people to discover that when they see the concert next week. But part of it was just that he was so clever and he was so verbal, and it was an opportunity for him not only to show off his wit. I mean, probably he and Lorenz Hart were probably the two wittiest lyricists when it came to that. But the one of the joys of that was that they could be endless. You could keep doing them, and so there's so many verses. When you get to "Kiss Me, Kate," another example, obviously, is the "Brush Up Your Shakespeare," which is one of the great list songs of all time. Being so witty, but that was really a signature of his. So anybody who would do something after that was appropriating from him. But that was a real signature of Cole Porter's. And one of the things I think about it is that it puts. When we think of songs, it's so much the melody that carries you along in songs, and that's why composers tend to be a little bit more famous than lyricists, generally speaking. Or we think of it as being more difficult or more of a special gift. We tend to denigrate people who work with words, but compared to music, not denigrate, but we don't put it on as high a plane.
Lost Scott for a second, but he was, talking about one of the great list songs, which is, of course, "Brush Up Your Shakespeare." Would you, Lynn, mind talking to us about the list song?
Certainly. They went throughout his entire career, and I think part of the idea of the list song came from his exposure to Gilbert and Sullivan, which were filled with these wonderful rhymes and patter songs. And he picked up on that, and his great wit and his sense of alliteration, his use of repetition and internal rhymes, and his vast knowledge of both classical literature, Greco-Roman allusions, mythology. I mean, he brought all of that in to various shows, songs, in order to highlight the focus on the words. And in the list songs, I think Scott was actually absolutely persuasive about the whole idea of the music being, in the case of a list song, the music is less important than the words. But it's interesting too, I would just add that it's the Cole Porter Musical and Literary Property Trusts that hold the collection of Porter's music after his death, and they give specific and equal reference and weight to his literary accomplishments as well. So the list songs include wonderful lists. Of course, the patter section of one of the songs that you'll hear in the concert, "Where is the Life That Late I Led?" And there's a marvelous list song in his Out of This World from 1950 called "They Couldn't Compare to You," which I think is one of his most marvelous segments. And of course, he's got things, he says, while I like the Queen of Sheba, she was mentally an amoeba. As for Beatrice d'Este, she was a pest and far too chesty. So there are these wonderful allusions to literary and just marvelous historical figures that he incorporates into that, and it's done at a very rapid rate. And of course, "You're the Top" is a wonderful and brilliant one, and gave an opportunity for him to show his literary chops, so to speak.
I hope
Very
that
convincing.
Nicole's question in the chat. Nicole is one of our students who heard you come to Hopkins, and she was interested in the humor of his lyrics and loved it in "You're the Top." I hope that answers the question.
Well, could we get to that question? Nicole, I do not know how to say your last name, but Nicole, could you speak a bit on how he coupled rhyme and rhythm to really drive home the humor of his lyrics? I really love this, and "You're the Top."
Who's that?
Susan,
director?
you want to?
Well, the person who could really do this best, I think, is Rob Kaplow, who has a show called What Makes This Great, and he actually wrote a chapter for us on what comes first, the lyrics or the music. And in a song like that, he played "You're the Top" as if it didn't have that little syncopation in it, and he said, "This is not. I mean, this is fine. There's nothing wrong with it." But what Porter did with it, where he goes a little off the beat, is what makes there's an excitement to it. It's kind of a frisson of something that you can't describe.
Yeah, that's what gives it its drive, really. And it's interesting that people will see when they see the concert next week when we do "You're the Top," that not only is it lyrically funny, it is so syncopated that it lends itself perfectly to dance. It becomes a dance number in our show.
Yeah,
That's wonderful.
Love to play with rhythms, and I think some of it has to do with his affinity for jazz and for dance and all of those things. We saw that early in his early pieces.
Well, so here we've got the list songs. What other stylistic techniques do you think that we should think about as listeners before we, watch next week's show? But in general, when we're listening to his songs, which are ubiquitous, what else do you think we can come away with?
I think a principle, a really interesting thing. I mean, most of the time when we talk about Broadway music being taken by the jazz world and turned into jazz standards, there are about 3,000 the Great American Songbook numbers that have been turned into jazz standards. A huge chunk of the Great American Songbook has been adapted by jazz people. And we tend to think of that as Gershwin, and we tend to think of that a little bit as Irving Berlin. But Cole Porter had a very big hand in that as well. And part of it is because of the plasticity of his writing. It was very adaptable to other kinds of styles. That's one of the things we talked about in the concert next week a little bit, is that his music could be done on almost any style. It could be adapted to everything from rock and roll to jazz to pop to country. It all worked because the music had such flexibility. It was so sturdily constructed that you could do it in so many different ways and it would still stand up. And so jazz musicians really loved Cole Porter's music because it was so adaptable to them. And a lot of it was turned into jazz. That's why Ella Fitzgerald did a whole album of Cole Porter's music, for instance. And I think that's emblematic of the flow through of jazz to Cole Porter and Cole Porter to jazz.
And Lynn?
I think that his harmonic structure is also so rich and so nuanced that jazz musicians have a lot to work with. Mm-hmm. And when they are constructing their own improvisations and riffing on top of what the changes are, he gives them a lot to work with. I mean, he's always incorporating elements, oftentimes jazz idioms, jazz modes, flatted thirds, flatted sevenths, and this ambiguity between major and minor that is so fertile and, as you said, so adaptable to jazz improvisation and jazz use. And I think it's really very, very much a tribute to his ability to write in a very versatile and usable way that many people can interpret in different fashions.
I think you could see it early on. He wrote a little counterpoint exercise, maybe when he was studying with Pietro Jan. And it's in the style of a Bach invention, but there are blue notes in it. And it's just a great example of how he veers away from the rules. And I think in many ways exhibits part of his own personality as the other, as the person outside of the mainstream. And he doesn't use the 32 bar pattern. He takes away some of the things that you find in the Tin Pan Alley songs and does his own thing, especially in a song like Night and Day. But there are others that veer from that model that you hear in so many of the songs. And I think jazz musicians like that because it allows them to then move away from that formula.
And he was so rhythmically skilled, and he incorporated so much syncopation in unusual ways and beat anticipations. He didn't just play it straight, and that also had great appeal for jazz musicians.
In terms of lyrics, I know that you teach courses. Scott, you are an educator, definitely one of my educators. Where, if you were to put him on a syllabus, and it could be a very diverse syllabus, it could, it could go to Sappho, if we wanted it to. Who are other lyricists, poets that you would put on a syllabus with him? If you could only do 4 others.
Oh, that's hard. But certainly Lorenz Hart would be one of them. They're the closest, and both were gay, and I think that influenced a lot of their lyrics because they had to write in a subterranean kind of way to express feelings that other songwriters, heterosexual songwriters, could express openly. They had to express in a kind of subterranean way. So Lorenz Hart, yes. Although Lorenz Hart was a sadder version, Porter was a happier version of Lorenz Hart, I would say. But who else? Boy, I don't know. Ira Gershwin certainly would be in that category. I mean, we're talking about the very best lyricists of Broadway. And I would keep it in the Broadway canon, really, because that's where Cole Porter had his greatest success. I mean, he did write for the movies, and there were songs in Hollywood films, but most of his success was really Broadway success.
Maybe Sondheim, do you think? Or
oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But Sondheim wrote really integrated musicals in a really complex way, whereas by and large, Porter really wrote songs to be songs. I mean, the best example of that actually probably would be Kiss Me Kate. Anything Goes, because that was supposed to open in 1934, but there was a terrible thing happened about a shipwreck a few weeks before it was supposed to open. So the producer of it said, this is going to be in terrible taste. We have to throw the book out and write a new book and just do a new thing. So they just kept the songs and wrote a whole show around the songs, because the songs were the best part of the whole thing. And then they wrote this clever show built on songs. So the songs clearly came first, but the songs were not written to the show. The show was written to the songs, and he didn't write the show.
Sort of a little bit like the reverse of Seven Lively Arts, where it was Billy Rhodes who was running that whole production with the Stravinsky Ballet and a William Schumann opera scene and Moss Hart skits, and it was a real hodgepodge. Benny Goodman was playing. That was
right, exactly. So the songs, I mean, he wrote songs to be great songs, and if they and he would write a song to a moment, or if somebody said we need a song for such and such, he could write that. But it was really only Kiss Me Kate that was really a truly integrated musical that he wrote, and it was his answer to Oklahoma, basically. That he could do it too, basically, and he could do it so well if he wanted to.
Lynn, any additions to the syllabus?
No, I think Scott nailed it, and I agree about Kiss Me Kate, and I think he was not sure he could do it until he was dragged kicking and screaming by the Spaveks to work on that. But that's a whole other story. I do want to just add one other small thing. I think there were certain themes for the subject matter, and I don't know if you touched on that in a later point, but certainly, the patter songs and list songs is one category, but also bittersweet love songs, which I think ties in with Scott's reference to the fact that as a gay man at a time when that was not an acceptable lifestyle, he had to write in multiple ways around the subject of love, and it always had that bittersweet quality in most of the songs that he wrote about love. And of course, he satirized the upper crust, the very rich, the old rich, the moneyed class, and the nouveau riche. And the city of Paris was another great favorite topic in his songs, and these all seem to recur again and again throughout his career and his output.
Well, we have a few things that the people in the audience have put forward, a few names, Comden and Green, Noel Coward, and Jacques Brel and Kurt Weill.
I would say, well, Noel Coward absolutely was a great influence. He was a great friend of his, and I think early in his career he kind of wrote in the Noel Coward style a lot. I think he was very influenced early on by Noel Coward in the beginning, and yes, many of those are. Comden and Green is a great choice to add to that group. Absolutely.
Before we leave this part of the conversation, we've got a great question from Suthika. I need to learn how people say people's names. Suthika. What was Cole Porter's reaction towards lyrics of certain songs getting censored, banned, or changed? Did he willingly make these changes?
So her name is Jessie, actually.
Oh, Jessie. Okay.
I mean, that's
sorry, Jessie.
Another classmate of Nicole's. Well, we talked about some of the songs that were censored, and he couldn't understand why, he couldn't write a song that had things in it that were slightly dicey, when there were movies and other things that, literature was filled with dicey things. He objected to that. Love for Sale was one of the things that was censored. Some of the lyrics in You're the Top, which was the one with the cocaine, where he had to change cocaine to Guerlain and to perfume. There was Lindbergh.
I get a kick out of you.
Yeah. And the Lindbergh Baby, they had to change that. In Anything Goes, I think there were many changes, from Young Bears to 3-letter words, and several iterations of that from Broadway to movie required changes, just because of the censors being so sensitive to the times. And so in each of these revivals, they could go back to certain lyrics that weren't appropriate at that time, but were perfectly fine for now, and vice versa.
But as is always the case, once something gets censored, everybody wants to hear it. So Love for Sale became much more popular because it was banned than it might otherwise. There was another song in 1926 by called Love for Sale, also a similar theme, actually, a Broadway show tune. It just wasn't as good. It's actually a very good song, but not as good as Love for Sale by Cole Porter.
Love for Sale is amazing. It's a fabulous song.
Well, this is Elizabeth Welch, who's a part of Town Hall's history because she was one of the stars of the Black Broadway program that George Wein produced at the Hall in the 80s, which included her and Adelaide Hall, and so many others, including a really young Gregory Hines, Bobby Short. But she's the one who really sang Love for Sale. What is the story behind that? Would you mind taking us through that, Lynn?
Sure. That was a situation where originally it was, it's a song essentially about prostitution, and it was scheduled to be sung by a white woman in front of a white business, and the censors said, no, it should be sung, as they said, by a colored girl in front of something in Harlem, and they placed it in Cotton Club, and Elizabeth Welch was the one that they chose to sing it. And of course, it became a tremendous hit and a signature song of hers. But it was definitely something that was not originally planned by Porter. And he was known to have a very broad-minded and appreciative attitude towards people who were considered on the fringes of what was then acceptable society. And maybe because of his own situation, or likely because of his own situation, but he was very open-minded, and he appreciated people's talents for what they were, and he certainly did not originally plan that this had to be only sung, because of its off-color nature by a Black woman. And so that's what I know about it. If others have more to add, please do so. Yeah.
Well, there's a question about whether it was male prostitution or female. I mean, it's ambiguous, just the way so many of his songs are. You don't know if he's writing in an autobiographical way or whether these are people he knows. It's always interesting to delve into the backgrounds of why the songs were written.
Well, I want to go to Hollywood for a moment if we can, because he seems like one of these songwriters who just ends up in so many different productions or, film productions, in part because something's playing on the radio that happens to be one of his songs. But oftentimes in the beginning part of his career is because he was contracted for this. I mean, for me, I want to talk first and foremost about Night and Day, the actual film that's meant to be about him. But I also want to hear about him initially being brought to Hollywood. But Cary Grant starred as Cole Porter in a movie. Like, let's get that out the way. This is kind of huge, but controversial, and he wasn't particularly happy about it. Can you talk to us about that? I think, Lynn, you know a good deal about this moment.
Well, I actually would defer to the others. It's just something I know it was really quite fictionalized and sanitized and not a particularly accurate representation of his life or work.
If I remember correctly, I think he sort of famously said he was greatly amused by it because there wasn't anything in it that was accurate.
But he had a hand in it. In the letters, he talked about what he wants. He was micromanaging it somewhat, as I recall.
He may have micromanaged it to not be about him at all.
Really? Yes. Yeah.
I mean, what it was, this all, I think, came out of Yankee Doodle Dandy, the success of this musical, George M. Cohan, that suddenly there was this spate of musicals from 1940 on throughout the 40s about famous composers because they realized they could use the music, and people loved this music. And oddly enough, because of I'm speculating here, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but after Cole Porter's accident in 1937, there was the sense of the best was behind him in some way, so the idea of doing a biography of Cole Porter, even though he was really, he wasn't like Cohan, who was essentially gone, or Jolson, who was at the end of his career seemingly at the end of his career. This was really, in some sense, as we learned, almost mid-career for Cole Porter. But he had so many famous songs that the audience, the American public, loved, that it was a great opportunity to really just play the music, get the music out there again.
Right, and while some of these are film adaptations of musicals like The Gay Divorcee or Anything Goes, there are also films that are coming around his songs that already exist, but that weren't in musical form. And then there's High Society. What's the story behind High Society?
Who wants to take that one?
I was thinking, I was going back to, the first thing I said about Don't Fence Me In, and how he actually didn't write that song, he paid someone for the lyrics, the person who wrote the song, because he wanted to break into Hollywood at that point, and he saw that as a way of rewriting these lyrics in his own style. And then, of course, Roy Rogers, I think, sang it, and then Kate Smith put it on her radio show, and it became a hit. So that was one of the ways he broke into Hollywood. But Born to Dance and Broadway Melodies, the Broadway Melodies of 1940 and other ones had all these great artists like Fred Astaire and Eleanor Powell and then Ginger Rogers, which really helped promote these Hollywood shows. And High Society with Grace Kelly. What more do you want, right?
It's interesting about Don't Fence Me In because he wrote that and it languished. Nobody wanted it. It didn't. The hilarious idea that Roy Rogers, had a hit with that, with a Cole Porter song. still sort of boggles the mind in a way. But yeah, but by the time he went to Hollywood, he was Cole Porter, at that point, because stuff like Night and Day. He wrote the Gay Divorce, the music for the Gay Divorce for Fred Astaire, which is a hit. And then by the time when that was made as a movie as the Gay Divorcee in 1934, using his music, Cole Porter was already a big star as a composer. So breaking into Hollywood was a non-issue at that point. Still, Hollywood never doesn't always know how to use its composers. They would take these musicals. I'm not talking about Cole Porter, just in general. They would take these great Broadway musicals and then ditch the music, and have some new music written, or some of the songs. They didn't always know what to do with them. Very often, it was really a better thing for like the MGM musicals when they wrote the music for the musical instead of taking something from Broadway, because the time they messed it up.
I think in the Gay Divorcee, they only used one of his songs. Isn't that right?
Well, Night and Day.
Yeah, that's one. Right.
But
I think they used more of them. That wasn't just that. I'm speaking off the top of my head, but I think there was more than Night and Day.
Not his.
That's all they needed.
But with for example, MGM style musicals, Les Girls, did he compose songs specifically for that musical?
I'm not sure. I'm going to leave that to the experts. I'm not certain about that.
Of course, Gene Kelly's last MGM production.
Right. I'm not positive.
I know he wrote for Aladdin. I think that was one of his shows.
He wrote for Aladdin. Yeah, that was a TV.
Yeah.
Right.
So someone asked about Frank Sinatra singing his songs. And there's that great story of when Frank was young, and Cole walked into this seedy bar in New Jersey, and Frank saw him and he said, "Oh, Cole Porter's here. I'm going to sing Night and Day." And he started to sing it, and he forgot the lyrics. And Cole later, though, they repaired their relationship, and he said Frank Sinatra had the best voice and sang with the most passion, and he wanted him for a role in I can't remember which musical it was, but I think Frank did have a role in one of those, either the movie or I think it must have been one of the movies.
Well, this is a question that I was already prepared to ask you, which is there's so many pop and jazz renditions of Porter songs. First question, is there a particular artist, and this could be somebody who, was actually in a stage production as well. Is there an artist that you think has a particular ability in interpreting Porter songs? And the second, which does not have to be related to the first, is there a favorite non-cast recording of a Porter song that you really love?
I can answer the first one. Ethel Merman.
Yeah.
She really knew how to sing his songs, and really, I think he loved writing for her, probably for her timbre and the style of her singing. But maybe someone should take the second part of that.
Ethel Merman belongs to Cole Porter and also belongs to Gershwin. I think among non-Broadway people we mentioned, Frank Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald are probably the two principal Cole Porter interpreters. I hate to mention this, but I mentioned it in the show coming up, but next week. But Frank Sinatra, for instance, recorded Night and Day 5 times throughout his career. He recorded so many of Cole Porter's songs. And as I said before, Ella Fitzgerald did an album. The point was really that so many people, as you said, Malay, that in every genre of singer, from Willie Nelson to the Temptations, recorded his songs. So it's really he's a pot of gold for everybody.
Yeah. Is there anyone?
Well, the Ella Fitzgerald I particularly like. Sometimes she has such a marvelous accuracy in her singing, and she captures the emotional component so beautifully. And she doesn't rewrite the song to suit her needs. She has the voice that a large range of, and the chromaticism of many of his songs that are technically more difficult, and some singers take liberties in the way they perform it. But Ella Fitzgerald is really so spot on. It's beautiful to hear her renditions of it. And I agree with Scott. I think she's one of the finest. And really, for its time and place, Fred Astaire, for the songs that were written for him to sing, I thought he also is a worthy proponent of the performance.
And especially as you talk about percussion, because he could dance those numbers too. I mean, it shows just how musical he was as well, in the most basic way that is for your body, not just your voice.
Right. So, he felt it throughout his entire being.
Yeah. We shouldn't forget about Porter himself, who really does a good job with his own songs, despite the fact that some people have said he's not a good pianist or his voice is limited in range. When I listen to Cole Porter, I want to hear him sing it. And I don't know if that's because of the authentic quality of it. We also have a colleague, a collaborator, who has recorded all 300 of Porter's songs. He's a Belgian singer by the name of Wilfried van den Brande. And did a movie about Porter called Finding Cole. And these renditions are very operatic, which I love listening to them, but I'm always going back to either Porter himself or Astaire, who does a good job of mimicking Porter.
One other thing about this, Malay, that one of the things that, and I think one of the reasons why Cole Porter was so successful on Broadway and his songs can be done by so many people in so many styles, is that they're incredibly actable. I mean, even the jazz songs or the songs you wouldn't think of, they all, in one way or another, if you're a good actor, you can tell the story of the song. It's not just a hook, and a 32 bar in and out. He's a great storyteller, whether it's a song or a love song or whatever, and people will see this in the concert next week, that these are actable songs, every one of them, even the songs you don't think of as actable. And that allows them to breathe and to find different interpretations. He's just a wonderful storyteller in song and lyric.
This is why he's also such a great songwriter to perform if you're a cabaret artist. It's that storytelling quality, and some of the names that have been dropped in here. Daniel Cerrucci says Blossom Dearie, Mabel Mercer, and Bobby Short, two of the greatest cabaret artists in the U.S. Well, I want to go back for a second to Ethel Merman before we really start to close out talking about next week's show. Can we just talk about Ethel Merman and their relationship with each other? Did he write the songs to fit her, or did she just already fit the songs?
So I think Anything Goes was that the first big collaboration they had?
Yes.
I think so.
Yeah. And it was such a perfect part for her. Reno Sweeney, right? She was playing Reno Sweeney in that one. And the character itself was, the quality of her voice, kind of, just gusto that she was able to project, that he, I think he loved writing. He just got incentivized by listening to her sing and wrote more and more for her. And she appreciated it. I think they had a great relationship. I don't think they ever had an argument, as far as I know.
She was the consummate professional. I mean, she was the person you give her. She's like Lou Gehrig of musical theater. She was iron lunged as well as so reliable a performer. This is slightly off subject, but I think it's a great story. I've told it before, but it goes with Anything Goes. Mel Brooks was this poor, impoverished kid. His uncle was a cab driver, and as a tip for a ride that he got, his uncle got tickets to Anything Goes. and he took Mel with him as a little boy to go see it. And they were in the last row of the second last row of the balcony. And his uncle didn't like the show, and Mel loved the show, but they could only agree on one thing: that Ethel Merman was too loud.
Yeah, I've heard similar stories that not only could she be heard in the last row of the theater, but she could be heard in the last row of the next door theater. And well, her diction and her projection were legendary, and I think that also had appeal because they didn't have head mics and lapel mics at that time. And you know, someone who could project and make those brilliant words be understood and heard was obviously going to be valued by composers.
And that's what he liked about Sinatra, the diction. No, the
Right.
absolute clarity of the words. And as you say, that was preeminent for him, primary.
Well, we have a show next week, and Robert Davidson is asking, what are the years that will be featured in the Cole Porter years?
I can answer that for you. The first show that we're representing is Anything Goes from 1934. And then we do go into the 50s through Can. Nothing after that. So the shows in between there. That's not entirely sure. I'm sorry. We also did Wake Up and Dream from 1929. And Miss Otis Regrets actually was in High Diddle Diddle, which was in London. It never actually was in a Broadway show. It's our one little diversion from the Broadway canon. But so really from 1929 to the early 50s is covered. They're 9 songs, so it's really just a taste of what Cole Porter offered us. But the performers make you feel like you're seeing a great panoply of Cole Porter because they do such a fantastic job.
Well, and in choosing these songs, I mean, obviously you have over 300 to choose from. Why the songs that you chose?
It's a good question. We're trying to find songs that are famous songs. I mean, we're only doing 9, so we didn't want to do things that were obscure. We want to really kind of represent Cole Porter through the major elements of his career. So we had to include Kiss Me Kate. We had to include Anything Goes. And after that, we were looking for things that were representative. We wanted a great love song. We wanted a great jazz song. So we were picking and choosing among the famous songs for that. No doubt we were going to leave out many of the songs people think of as that are their own favorites. But hopefully after they see what we've done with these songs, we'll create new favorites for them if they hadn't considered these on their list of great Cole Porter songs. I think they're all great Cole Porter songs.
Well, the rest of us, we got to see an edit of the show, which was a great pleasure. Thank you, Scott, for providing that to us. But, you know, I know for me, listening to, you know, what is this thing called love is just, I don't know, it's just so special to feel like I was watching it almost live, but actually in someone's home. You know, this like very strange construction. What was it like to produce a show that you usually do live, but you know, in this kind of format? How did you come up with that? How did you deal with those limitations?
Well, Kenita Miller sings "What Is Called Love," and it can be done any number of ways. It has been done any number of ways. And my direction to her was just sing it, slow it down, and sing it as a tempestuous love song, something that's just tearing your heart out as a real torchy thing. And it's an extraordinary performance on her part. I've heard this song and seen it performed, and actually, to me, this is the best performance of that song I've ever seen. And I thought she was amazing. And when there's another song she sings that you in the show, I don't want to give it away. Entirely different tone and style, and another highlight in the concert. But the answer to your question is really knowing who is matching a singer in a song. That's been the hallmark of Broadway by the years, trying to find the best people to sing the song who will understand it and be able to interpret it in a way that bring its, if not its best qualities, a fresh way of looking at it. Or when I say fresh, I don't mean like turn something that's into bossa nova that it wasn't intended to be a bossa nova. I just mean that they will find the richness in the song and be able to put it over in their style, make it their own, be true to the essence of what that song is all about. And that's what I think everybody in this concert does.
So Miss Otis Regrets is in
I should mention. Yes, Miss Otis Regrets, again, very different. This is Lily Cooper, the Tony Award nominee from Tootsie, who sings that, and Chuck Cooper's daughter. And she brings a kind of, I don't know, we do it in a sort of black and white kind of color and coloring of the almost chiaroscuro. Touch and sigh and funny and heartbreaking all at the same time. It's a great performance.
It's said that he wrote it for Ada Bricktop. You know, if that's true, he may have. He spent a lot of time at Bricktop's when they were in Paris, and Ada, you know, was with the red hair and taught everyone there, including the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, how to do the Charleston and the Black Bottom. So it wouldn't surprise me if that. Lynn knows more about that song, something having to do with lynching, right, Lynn?
Yes, absolutely. That was the whole.
Yes.
Upper class lynching.
Yeah.
That's why it's so rich. We have excuse me, just to make one point, that it's just so rich to have a Black woman who said, "I want to sing that song." I mean, she wanted to sing that. I didn't give it to her. She said, "Let me do that," and I said, "Absolutely," because the resonance that brings to have a Black woman today singing the song about lynching of a rich white woman, presumably white, in this upper class Noel Coward style has so much resonance. It's really one of the things that's so interesting also is that we had a large pool of singers that we were for all three shows in the Broadway by the Year series that we're doing Kander and Ebb and Andrew Lloyd Webber after this one, each 2 weeks apart. And it was really the Black singers who were attracted to doing the Cole Porter songs. I mean, he appealed to them, and I wouldn't say more than, but their first inclination was to do Cole Porter before Kander and Ebb or before Andrew Lloyd Webber. That his music spoke to them first, if you will.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, you, Lynn and Susan got to watch the show, and I mean, there are songs that we've talked about already today performed there. Is there anything that you just want to say about whether it's Miss Otis Regrets or It's All Right with Me? Just one of those things. Any songs that just jumped out at you that you think you just want to speak about the lyrics or the song in any way? Performance, obviously, incredible.
Go on, Lynn.
I wanted to compliment the dancers, singers, for the two songs and dances that they do. I don't want to spoil it for the audience that's yet to see it, but I have to say they did a marvelous job, and it was very, very, very well done. I very much like the rendition of. As Scott was saying, I think what is this thing called love? It was one of the finest performances of that song I've seen. I thought that the whole program was very, very thoughtfully done, and each artist brought that sensitivity, that ability to understand that each song in its own miniature way was like a mini opera or a mini story that was captured, and the meaning of the lyrics are so incredibly tied to the way Porter sets them in the music, and the secret of a really fine performance is when a performer understands that and highlights the text and performs the words and the music in a way that really tells that story and focuses
Yeah, I love the what is this thing called love, and the other connection to Paris and to Bricktop was Hutchinson, Hutch, his friend, the Grenadan pianist, who became a very close friend of his, very, very close, and did the first recording of it in 1929. It's got a combination of African drum beats and Chinese gong music. It's extremely exotic, and then there was a ballet choreographed by Balanchine around this song, where the dancers were dancing around a statue, I think, that was made to resemble an African idol. So there again, these connections with his love of the exotic and his love of Black performers, especially this one.
Well, not to be a total gossip, but is there speculation that the character, the Black pianist character in Downton Abbey, was based on Hutchinson?
Yes, even with the carnation in his
Yes.
pocket, very much so. And there was a trial involved, with Hutch, and I think he made his way up the social ladder maybe a little too quickly, and then things didn't go very well for him at the end. But his orchestra was used by Linda and Cole in their palazzo in Venice, and also in their place in Paris. And I think he also went to London with them. And there's a woman who's doing some work on that, on his time in London.
Well, wonderful. Well, about almost half of these songs, so about 5 of these songs, are from either Anything Goes or Kiss Me Kate. And Cole Porter himself said that he thought that these were his 2 perfect musicals. They're very different. But I was wondering if you, Scott, would start with why you think he believed that was so, and if you agree with him. If all 3 of you wouldn't mind answering that, I'd really appreciate it.
Well, I could certainly see why he felt that way, because Kiss Me Kate is his most successful musical in almost every way, commercially and critically. So why would he not embrace that? And also that it was this integrated musical. It won the Tony Award for the very first Tony Award for Best Musical. Went to Kiss Me Kate in 1948-49, and and I think probably in the case of Anything Goes, as I said before, he was probably rather proud of the fact that the musical was built around his songs rather than the songs were written to fit the book. It was an unusual situation at that point, I think. And when you look at these, particularly Anything Goes, you feel that way about certain musicals. You go see a revival of them now, and you say, "Oh my God, that came from that show, and that came from that show, and that came from that show." It's just one hit after the other, and it's extraordinary. When later on, when we see a musical from the '60s, '70s, '80s, whatever, there's usually 1 or 2 songs that came out of it that became hits, and in these earlier cases, there were like half a dozen or 8 songs that came out of them that are now Great American Songbook numbers.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Lynn?
I especially think that his Kiss Me Kate was a masterpiece. I think it was particularly outstanding because it was the only show that he did that really had a book, a script that was up to the level of his music. As has already been pointed out, many times musicals were built around the particular song, or they were a fabrication that didn't have much coherence, and it was not necessarily the best arrangement for lasting, timeless quality for a musical to survive. In the case of Kiss Me Kate, he had this play within a play that was really beautifully constructed by the Spivaks, Bella and Sam Spivak. And Porter, as I mentioned before, was not sure he was up to the task. It was kind of thought that he was maybe past his prime, and he had very little self-confidence at that point. And they persuaded him.
Yes, he was persuaded to do it, and better than that, it had so many levels to it that because it was actually inspired by Lunton Fontaine, these battling famous actors. So it worked on so many levels as a kind of
So
gospel
many
thing.
levels.
And as
Yeah.
well, Shakespeare, it worked on so many levels so that it could appeal to almost any level of person in the audience. They could access it and enjoy it.
Right.
Ironic.
And the music came out of the text of the play. I mean, it arose effortlessly, and every song advances either the characterization or the plot, and it was seamless. And that was the thing that was so remarkable about it. It was not just contrived, okay, time for another song. It was actually something that flowed with the drama that was being portrayed. And he had such a wealth of styles that he incorporated into it. I mean, anything from, the Bowery waltz of, the whole thing was just so beautifully constructed. He has the Shakespearean element, and it's the music within the music, the world within the world that he has, the play within the play, and he matches the music flawlessly to each element and level within that show, and it's an astonishing work of art, really.
How ironic that he was, I think he was very negative after the Rodgers and Hammerstein formula musicals came out and said he was finished, there was nothing left for him. And then he wrote in that model, in a way, in Kiss Me Kate.
Wow. Well, I'm just so happy that we're having this conversation, and I'm so happy that we've all gotten to see this and talk about this, and excited for folks to see this next week. We have two more questions that I thought were kind of fun. One is from Daniel Cerrucci. Speaking of lyrics as poetry, was he known to have used a rhyming dictionary? And for me, my other questions would be, what were his tools? Was he sit at the piano, write on staff paper? Did he write lyrics on the go? How did he do this?
He had a thesaurus next to him and on the piano, and used that and crossed out, words kept changing things. He was never satisfied with the first version, and he was assiduous about the way he composed. He wasn't. I don't think it came out naturally the way it did with Irving Berlin, who couldn't even read music.
He had a rhyming dictionary for sure, and a thesaurus, right?
Yeah.
But didn't he say, if I remember correctly, I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, didn't he say he sort of wrote the beginning and the end first, and then sort of filled in, but he had an idea as to where it was going as a piece.
It's fun to look at his sketches because he doodles in the margins of these women in like Cecil Beaton hats. He's fascinated by hats, and it reminds me a little bit of the earlier period that I study, where in the margins there are all these gargoyles and things that people are writing, the scribes are writing to try to highlight what the music and the text is about. I think he was getting ideas from his doodles sometimes. I don't know, pictorial images.
I would add only one thing to this, to sort of step back from the actual doing to the why he was doing it. Many people talk about how easily bored Cole Porter was. He was such a bright guy that if things weren't, he would just get bored really easily. And he found writing lyrics, writing music, to be his antidote to his ennui. And this is probably an apocryphal story, but it sort of speaks to that issue, that when he had his famous horseback riding accident in 1937, and his legs were crushed underneath this horse, and they were waiting for the ambulance to come. The story goes that he wrote the lyrics to DeLovely to get his mind off of the pain, and that's how. And he was trying to figure out. He was in the middle of writing it, and he figured out how to write it while he was waiting for the ambulance.
There's so many stories about that. Monty Woolley, I guess there's a story about where one of them said they were on a boat trip. One of them said after they ate something fabulous, delightful. Another one said delicious, and then the third one said.
Yeah. And there aren't many songwriters, poets, who are celebrities. And to some extent, he felt like a socialite to a lot of people. And Daniel had a question about this. Daniel Cerrucci, did he consciously brand himself as a celebrity or public figure?
I would say no.
It's hard to know if he consciously did it, but he was a sort of flamboyant guy, in that time, in that sort of jazz age world. But I'll put it another way, really, because just like Irving Berlin, songwriters in that era, whether it was Rodgers and Hammerstein, Rodgers and Hart, or Irving Berlin or the Gershwins, George Gershwin, they were like the Beatles of their day. They were really totally famous. They were followed in the social columns and in the gossip columns in a way that rock stars are now. So the fame came to him because of his success, I think, as much as anything else. But he enjoyed it. And the fact that he was so wealthy really helped a lot, even before he became really famous, when his grandfather was the one who had all the money and controlled the purse strings. And when he came into his larger inheritance when he was living in Paris, he famously said that, I'm going to mess up the line, but you'll get the meaning of it, that a lot of people are ruined by getting a lot of money, but he just thought, I just have more fun. So, he was not ruined by it. It just sort of opened him up to be able to be more of who he was.
It didn't hurt that he had a rich wife with societal connections.
Absolutely, yep.
And all those women like Lady Mendel and her partner Elizabeth Marbury, Elsa Maxwell, these people sort of, he was a magnet for the rich and the hoi polloi, and they wind up in his lyrics too.
Right.
Yeah.
And on some level, though, he cultivated the idea that he was just sort of a carefree playboy. He didn't let on to very many people how hard he worked on the songs. And I think it was Moss Hart who had a very interesting quote likening the hours and the toil that he put into composing to a work level that even a longshoreman would blanch at adopting, that it was so rigorous and that he put so much time and effort into writing the songs, but he always wanted to give the impression somehow that he just had tossed them off, effortlessly.
Sprezzatura, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was part of the image, I guess, that he cultivated.
But he became a meme. There's that scene in Hannah and Her Sisters where Woody Allen and Diane Wiest are coming out of the Hotel Carlyle after hearing Bobby Short play Cole Porter's music, and she's bored. She wants to go somewhere else, and he screams at her, "You don't deserve Cole Porter." And so his sophistication, his intellect and all is something that separates him, I think, from many of his peers.
Good point. I think that's true.
It's very true.
Well, I want to thank you so much for spending this time with us and for lending all your insight. It's very exciting to hear Cole Porter scholars speak to each other, all three of you. So thank you so much. I want to point out that I came to know about at least two of you because of the Cole Porter Companion. So I do recommend going ahead and getting it. You can get it at any major bookstore, but of course you can get it from the press itself. So please go ahead. It's fascinating. I also, I want to make sure that people know that we have a show next Monday. Scott, anything to say?
No, just yes, I shouldn't say no. It is the first of the new form of Broadway by the year. It'll be Broadway by the year, the years of, in this case, the Cole Porter years, and then the Kander and Ebb years, and then the Andrew Lloyd Webber years. So we hope that you'll actually buy the whole package of them. But if not, certainly come to the first one and see if you enjoy it, and then you can always join us for the later ones. The the Cole Porter show has Alexander Gemignani in it, who's a Tony nominee. He played Jean Valjean he was chosen to play Jean Valjean in the first cast of the first revival of Les Miserables. He's a Tony nominee for playing Enoch Snow in the most recent revival of Carousel. It's been in 9 Broadway shows. Nicole Henry, who's a big jazz star, is in it. Mentioned Kenita Miller, is wonderful, is a 3-time Drama Desk nominee. And mentioned the dancing as Danny Gardner and Emily Larger do the 2 dance numbers in the show. And Lily Cooper is a Tony nominee from Tootsie. So we have this extraordinary cast in the first show. And that will follow in the ones that come after. We have Uta Lemper, for instance, in the Kander and Ebb Show, and Beth Levels, a Tony Award winner, and on and on. You can look at the cast lists as time goes on. But the Cole Porter show was just a dream to put together. It was so much fun to do, and I'm so thrilled. Really, I think people who have been watching concerts online during this last horrible year, when live entertainment is not possible, will be knocked out by what these people do, and it will feel as if you're watching 9 little movies within one larger one. I think people will just go nuts. They'll love it.
It's wonderful. Yeah.
And we've got something special to announce today, which is that, there is the Kander and Ebb Show on the 10th. If you come a week earlier, so 2 weeks from today, you will get to see Scott and myself in conversation with John Kander himself. So please sign up for, subscribe to our newsletter if you're not already. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you will get the notification when we put the official announce out. But you are the first to know that John Kander himself will be on the Town Halls program in 2 weeks, speaking with me and Scott. So please come for that as well. I want to thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for coming to Town Hall. You could have been anywhere else, but you came and you talked about Cole Porter. So thank you all so much for coming. I want to take time to thank the Town Hall staff, in particular the production team who puts this together. It's Alex and Jeff and I. It's a team effort. We've been doing it for a year, and I think we're going to keep doing it even after we open up the hall. So always come here for history programs. To support the Town Hall and programs like these and Broadway by the Year, you can go visit thetownhall.org/donate. Have a great evening. Make sure to turn on your notifications. Make sure to subscribe. Buy your tickets for the Broadway by the Year package, and we'll see you next Monday, and then the Monday after that. Next Monday for the show, and the Monday after that for a conversation with Kander and Ebb. Thank you, Kander and Ebb. Kander and Ebb. Thank you so much. Actually, we'll go out now with just a clip of different performances from next week, just to give you a little taste of what you're going to get. But thank you, everyone, so much for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Malay. Thank you, everybody.
It was just one of those things. It was just one of those things. Just one of those crazy flings. One of those bells that now and then rings. Just one of those things. It was just...
I'm a toy balloon that is fated soon to pop. But if baby I'm the bottom, you're the top. Come on.
Miss Otis regrets she's unable to lunch today. Madam, Miss Otis regrets she's unable to